over here in France, it feels like he's sort of being treated almost like a normal footballer. Like I said, he's adored down in Marseille.
There are people who said at the time that, he should be in prison. And I don't necessarily disagree with that perspective. I can completely see why people who feel that way feel that way.
Thanks once again for tuning in. Joining me this week, I have the broadcaster and writer Tom Williams. Comment ça va, Tom?
Ça va très bien, merci, Matt. Et toi?
Et moi, ça va très bien. I also have France's most English of French football experts. It's Baptiste Reynaud from Le Classique Pod. Comment vas-tu, Baptiste?
Ça va super. Merci, Matt, and thanks for having me.
Wow, that accent. You know, sometimes when you get somebody who sounds English when he speaks English and he sounds French when he speaks French, really annoying people. Baptiste
the ultimate
is one of them, but he's really nice with it. He's very modest and very knowledgeable. Great to have Baptiste back on the French Football Show. As you all know, there are a lot of very interesting stories in and around the world of French football. Some of them can be surprising, some of them are inspiring, others can be much, much more difficult to address. Today's subject definitely falls into that last category. We are going to be talking about a very talented footballer, a striker who is currently the top scorer in Ligue 1, but an individual who makes a lot of football fans and indeed some journalists like ourselves feel a bit uneasy. It is time for Le Dossier. To start with, some background, just in case anybody has been living on Mars for the last 3 years. Mason Greenwood left his first club, Manchester United, after the charges against him, including attempted rape and assault, were dropped in February 2023. The Crown Prosecution Service in the UK said, in this case, a combination of the withdrawal of key witnesses and new material that came to light meant there was no longer a realistic prospect of conviction. In these circumstances, we are under a duty to stop the case. The England international subsequently resumed his career, had a brief spell at Getafe in Spain, and since then he's been shining for Olympique de Marseille here in France. He netted his 20th goal of the season against Toulouse on Saturday, meaning that he's the first Marseille player since André-Pierre Gignac 12 years ago to hit 20-plus goals in successive campaigns. The majority of Marseille fans have taken Greenwood to their hearts, and the Velodrome will be cheering him on against Liverpool in the Champions League on Wednesday night. Tom, I'll go to you first. We know that Mason Greenwood is doing brilliantly here in France. There's absolutely no debate about that. But the situation is strange. It's awkward as well. This is an England international. And what we've noticed is that his performances, his exploits, even his existence are basically being ignored back in the UK. While over here in France, it feels like he's sort of being treated almost like a normal footballer. If he scores goals, there are front page headlines with his face on. Like I said, he's adored down in Marseille. How have you been sort of experiencing the whole Mason Greenwood in Marseille thing?
I mean, every time I see Mason Greenwood playing for Marseille, every time I see his name written down in the paper or I hear him mentioned on the radio, I cannot avoid thinking about the accusations that were made against him, about the audio recording and the photographs that were posted online at the time that were absolutely horrifying. And there are people who said at the time that, he should be in prison and not resuming his football career. And I don't necessarily disagree with that perspective. I can completely see why people who feel that way feel that way. At the same time, he has not been convicted. He is a free man, and so he is entitled to resume his career, which is what he's doing and doing very successfully at Marseille. And when you cover French football, as we do, you cannot avoid him because he's one of the best players in the league. He was the joint top scorer last season in Ligue 1. He's the top scorer currently. And as a footballer, he's great to watch if you can set aside everything else. And I think ultimately this debate boils down to the extent to which all of us, personally and collectively, are prepared and able to set aside everything else. I've spoken to some ex-footballers about this, and I think in France, you speak to former players and there's a feeling that, British people, British journalists are being holier than thou by constantly banging on, as they see it, about the Greenwood case and about the background to it. And I think an unfortunate element of this story is that Mason Greenwood is not alone. He's not the first footballer to have been accused of doing something horrendous to a woman. And it makes the Greenwood thing extremely difficult. I don't think we should forget about what he was accused of doing. But the longer his career goes on, and in particular the more success he has, because chances are, come the end of this season, he will leave Marseille and he will go to one of the biggest clubs in Europe, and he will start to become a superstar. And the further he gets away from the accusations that were made, the more they kind of drift into, into the distant past. And there are plenty of famous footballers who've been accused of, domestic abuse, sexual assaults. You think in this country, people who were deified subsequently, George Best, Paul Gascoigne, this is not dragging people's name through the mud. This is people who had accusations made against them and who were kind of, sort of largely forgiven in the public eye. And that's not to say that I think Mason Greenwood should be forgiven necessarily, but, it's just a very difficult case to come to any firm conclusions on. And perhaps that is appropriate. Perhaps this is how we should feel about Mason Greenwood. He is always going to be someone who's going to be a little bit divisive. There are those of us who are never going to be able to think about him as just a footballer, and perhaps that's how it should be.
Yeah, well, first of all, I echo a lot of what as Thomas said. I think it's you can't unsee or you can't unhear once you've seen and heard it. And I think the struggle is that it should follow him wherever he goes, and it should not become a footnote of his career, and football shouldn't take over in the sense that it's more valuable than what we've seen or heard. I think that's a personal feeling, and I understand people like Thomas expressed. Some other people might say, well, look, he's entitled to redemption. He's a free man. He's entitled to learn from his ways, and he's still young, and maybe that's the path for him. I think for me, there's multiple things. One is, I think it felt like this was swept onto the carpet when he joined Marseille, and I think that's what a lot of people felt slightly horrified by. Is instead of addressing it head on in a way, and perhaps deploying the same arguments that we've mentioned, right, around presumption of innocence and his legal status, that people have, it seemed from the outside that the reaction in Marseille, certainly around the club, was very much sort of, let's not talk about the elephant in the room. And this is completely secondary to the fact that we've signed a really exciting player. And that we would have never been able to sign, but we've somehow signed him, and he's uber talented. And I think that's where that's where certainly I became a little bit repulsed by that. Because you expect better. You expect better from institutions that pride themselves on the way they represent a city, the way they represent certain people. And if that's rolling out the red carpet for somebody who committed acts or allegedly committed acts that we saw some evidence of and heard some evidence of, then it's going to feel really uncomfortable for a lot of people. I think then everybody gets to make their choice, I think, in a way. Certainly for us, at Le Classique, we've taken a position of only a very brief mention. We don't talk in depth, and I'm derogating from this today because it's an important topic and it needs to be discussed. But our position is, he delivers on the football pitch, move on, and we're not going to put a spotlight on him necessarily. I think this is just testament to how difficult a conversation this is. That it's difficult to find the right words, but I think for me, it's been around the sort of willful blindness around Marseille that I felt a little bit aggrieved at the time that you joined.
We're going to get the Marseille perspective now by speaking to Mourad Ertz, who is a Marseille based reporter. Mourad, we know Greenwood, he's been a big success on the pitch in Marseille. Can you just let us know what you've made of him during the last 18 months as a player, as a person, the way that he's carried himself in Marseille?
Hi, Matt. Yes, so Greenwood is, is top talent. Frankly, I think with that level of talent, with the world nowadays, the football world nowadays in 2026, we should have no chance to have a player like Mason Greenwood. Normally, these guys should play in Bayern Munich, Manchester United. Then the problem is that we all know why we have him. The only reason we have him is because of his past.
I've been to Marseille quite a lot for matches. It feels like he's very popular among the supporters. It's probably the shirt, it's probably the name that you see most on the backs of Marseille fans. Would you confirm that that's the case? He is a popular figure.
Yeah, and we have official data. I'm not sure for this year, but for last year, I'm sure that his name was the most printed on Marseille shirts in the official boutique. You think about kids nowadays, of course, like they see a guy that score 20 plus goal every season, is the best player on the field most of the time. Of course, kids will have him on their back, and he's pretty popular, and it's kind of protected even by Marseille fan, I will say, or by the majority of Marseille fans.
Okay, big question now. Do you personally think it's okay for Marseille fans to judge Greenwood purely on what he does on the pitch, or should his past be taken into account?
Yeah, that's the big question. Well, where to begin? If you allow me, I think it's important to start this discussion with how OM, Marseille club, and a Greenwood family lawyer decided to treat this problem. Because they decided not to treat this problem. They erase it. It doesn't exist anymore. This is as simple as that. Like, as soon as you arrive, it had been decided, like, why to always speak about that? This doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's not existing. So this is where we started, and this is where everything wrong, according to me, started. You should have treated the problem. Then we could decide, like, we could give him like redemption, whatever. But here it's like you just decided to erase this problem, and it's too big of a problem to be erased. And the worst, it's like we have those images that we cannot erase, If you've seen it, you've seen it. But then, football fans have this tendency, they just want to love their team, and you gave them a super toy, a super player. Football is an escape, and they wanted an escape from this situation to be able to enjoy this player. And anybody that remind them of this story, really, they made him pay. That's the thing as well. Like I remember this colleague that asked the simple question. I think the question that everybody should ask to Greenwood is like, is those pictures, this audio, is it yours? Was it yours? What you have to say about it? And because he asked this question, he was harassed online for weeks and weeks. So then you think twice, when you come and by fans that were like, shut up! Why you always come to, bother him with that? He's a football player. He already said that, So it's a bit sad because, I don't want to break the happiness of Marseille fan. Now I'm a journalist, but I could say that I'm born Marseille fan, and I made so many sacrifices as a Marseille fan. Now it's really these Greenwood things put a distance between me and my club. Now I'm a better journalist, Now I'm really seeing OM as a subject, not as my club. This Greenwood thing was the last drop that makes me become a good journalist. I would say now I'm a journalist first, and then then a fan, or at least having a special relation with OM.
Well, thank you very much to Mourad Ertz. That was it's really interesting to listen to, and quite sad as well, because I know Mourad is he's very passionate about his football. He's written a book on Marcelo Bielsa. He loved the whole Bielsa period at Marseille, and he's obviously been, quite touched and has found it quite difficult in the last 18 months having Mason Greenwood as the talisman, if you like, or certainly one of the main players of Olympique de Marseille. I mean, I go there quite a lot to commentate, and part of me sort of, I think the passionate football kind of lover likes watching Mason Greenwood because he's a terrific footballer to watch. And I know we're not really talking much about football, but I like it. And sorry, I like it. I like this footballer, and because he's English and in Marseille, I think part of me thinks, oh, this is good. And then suddenly the guilt comes, and I'm like, no, like I can't get behind him. I'm not going to tweet anything about him because in the UK I'll just get told to shut up, and and I think all of that is fair enough. The first time I went to the Velodrome last season, I was outside, and you always have thousands of Marseille fans milling around sort of 2-3 hours before kickoff, and I was really struck by the Greenwood shirts. They were absolutely everywhere. They were being worn by women. They were being worn by children. Part of me kind of was like, where the hell have I just landed? Have these guys not been following the news? Do they not know about this guy? But it also goes back to what Mourad and Baptiste was saying, the way, Marseille have presented Mason Greenwood. It's like, this is a top footballer. There's nothing else you need to know about him. And, the Marseille fans, by and large, have bought into that. So, yeah, overall, Mourad is obviously more effective than I am because he's down in Marseille and he's a fan and he finds that difficult. But as somebody who loves Marseille, the city, who loves the atmosphere and the vibe in the city and around the football club, I also have found that sort of, that sort of the fact that I'm not allowed to sort of get behind him, if you like. I found that quite difficult.
And as a commentator, Matt, how do you find having to commentate on Marseille matches? Because if Mason Greenwood scores a hat-trick, you have to call his goals like you would call the goals of any other player. It's not your role necessarily to offer moral judgment, but as you say, you are very aware of the Greenwood story. Does that present any challenges to you from a sort of a professional perspective?
I think as a commentator for the world feed, I think I don't have much leeway. We're not there to give our moral thoughts or even our opinions on people. We're there to commentate the game in as neutral fashion as possible. Of course, if someone does something brilliant, you get excited. You're not a robot. But I think, if I was commentating for TF1 in France or for ITV in the UK, it would be maybe a bit different. I think I would have scope to sort of say something, I don't know, like stunning goal from Mason Greenwood. I couldn't even imagine what you would say. What you would say.
What could you say in commentary?
Maybe you wouldn't scream or go as crazy as you would if it was, I don't know, Mo Salah. I don't know, Tom, but it's a good question, and I think us journalists as well as the fans, we have this sort of, I don't know if conundrum's the right word, but it's not necessarily easy.
Yeah.
Baptiste, what you were saying a little bit earlier, do you think things could have been different in terms of the way Mason Greenwood is perceived? The way, I don't know, that he could be perhaps more accepted by the footballing world if the communication had been different. I'm talking about the way Marseille have communicated, maybe Mason Greenwood as well. We heard that anecdote from Mourad saying, there was a journalist who asked him if the recordings, were real and could you comment on that? It's obviously a complex legal case. I don't know if realistically he could say anything, but it does feel like, even, I don't know. I was going to say even donating or associating with domestic violence charity or saying something about how he's working and getting help, or of course that would be seen as an admission of guilt, and maybe that's therefore not something that should be envisaged. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I know I aimed that criticism at Marseille, right? And that's why I was repulsed, like I said earlier. But you're right. I mean, if he had come out and made some declaration addressing it head on, and perhaps or the club had, as you said, maybe contributed to charities supporting women victims of that sort of alleged crime, then the question of authenticity would have been aimed at them, right? And whether they were doing that because they knew what they had gotten themselves into, and they were trying to whitewash somebody's reputation and make it better. So in that sense, in terms of communications, I think was it always a lose-lose? You go back to the first question of, are you doing the right due diligence by taking on that kind of player in the first place? And are you just admitting that you're taking somebody who has a legal case hanging over them, and with evidence that's been seen in the public space?
I suspect that at some point, Mason Greenwood and his advisors decided that the approach they were going to take to this story was just not to talk about it ever. As you say, Matt, it could be that if he were to willingly talk about it, he would expose himself to, legal, there could be legal consequences for that. And it could be that, that at Marseille they were made aware of that position, or that, between Greenwood and his advisors and the club, that they, decided to approach things in the way they have to protect his reputation, to protect the club's reputation. Knowing the backstory, it did feel, as Baptiste said, extremely unsatisfying and quite problematic to have, Roberto De Zerbi, for example, at Greenwood's introductory press conference, kind of talking about background noise and chatter as if these were, sort of social media rumors or something, rather than, what they are, which is something extremely grave. In this age where footballers are more aware of their public profile than ever before, the kind of the tell-all sit-down interview is often seen as the quickest way to redemption in the public eye. And I suppose the fact that Greenwood has never done that suggests that, it would suggest to me at least, that is a possibility that has probably been considered at some point, but then dismissed because of the hornet's nest that it would open. And so we're left with this very unsatisfying situation where, he has never, and maybe will never, talk about what is alleged to have happened.
In Marseille, it is difficult. I confirm what Mourad said. It is difficult to talk to people down there about it, because they don't want to hear it. They want to see this terrific footballer who's firing Marseille, perhaps to great heights. We'll have to wait and see. People say that people deserve a second chance. Down in Marseille, people look at Mason Greenwood, who is happy, seemingly, with his partner. They've had a baby recently, photos posted on Instagram, and they're like, who are we to judge? It doesn't feel like either of you two are ready to give this man a second chance. And I'm not accusing you or of anything. And I hear everything you've had to say, but he is a young man. Can you see a future? I mean, I think we can all see a future probably where he's at Real Madrid or Bayern Munich, or, like Tom mentioned, he's going to become a superstar. Can you see a future for him in the England team at some point?
Ooh, I think that's... Well, who knows? I mean, sport in general and football is like stories of redemption, if we could call it that. I think even moving to a bigger club is going to be... I think that club would be subject to the same kind of criticism that Marseille faced when he joined. Is that something they want to take on? I think for me, it's around it. What's been disappointing is that football is often accused of being a tribal sport, right? and you get that. You got that in a little bit with the reactions from some fans, I suppose, right? And the piece around, well, he's one of us, and oh, look, he's a great player, and that makes up for it. And I think that's a question that's going to be asked for England fans if that comes to it.
I mean, it's a case that speaks to, you know, the almost complete lack of morality within football, in that if a footballer proves himself to be exceptionally talented, and in Greenwood's case, exceptionally good at scoring goals and winning matches, football clubs are prepared to forgive them almost anything. And that has basically been the case for OM, and were he to go to, you know, an even bigger club, that would probably be the case there. I think England, the thought of him playing for England currently feels a long way off. I think because there was such outrage, and there was such an outcry when the accusations first surfaced, and every time an England manager has been asked about the possibility of him being recalled or asked about whether he is even being tracked, the question has just been dismissed out of hand. It helps that England are currently riding the crest of a fairly historic wave in terms of performance level and in terms of the talented players they have at their disposal. I suspect the debate would be framed slightly differently if England was struggling. It's probably helpful in that respect that they already have so many game-changing players. But there is part of me in the back of my mind that just thinks within the next few years, Greenwood is going to be playing for one of the biggest clubs in the world and he's going to be an absolute superstar, and more time will have passed and there will have been more water under the bridge, and that temptation for people to just kind of, you know, airbrush these unfortunate details, as they will doubtless be seen from his history, will only get stronger. You know, hopefully I'm wrong, but I guess we'll find out.
But you're right, that there are so many unsavoury stories, sadly, in football these days. And when I was talking to Murad sort of after recording the chat, you know, he was talking about how people in Marseille will say, yeah, but, you know, look at PSG, they're owned by Qatar. Look at Monaco, they're owned by a Russian, and this and that. Why is everyone having a go at Marseille? And Murad said, yeah, there's just so much whataboutery. And I just thought, wow, you're a French guy and you know that word. I mean, like. Is that right, Tom? Whataboutery? Yeah, is that the
Yeah, I mean that is the sign of someone who is, you know, who's very plugged into social media. Fair so play. Yeah, chapeau, Mouad.
Listen, we're going to be talking about more cheery stuff now, but I think it was interesting. I think it was important to talk about Mason Greenwood. Do send in an email if you've got an opinion or if you want to challenge us or agree with anything that we said. Also, if you've got another topic that you'd like us to go through in the coming weeks, league1podcast@gmail.com. That's our email address. And do also rate and subscribe on the podcast platforms and on our YouTube page, The French Football Show.